Good morning to everybody, and welcome to this Faculty of Business Administration and Economics of the Universidad Autónoma de Madrid. It's for me a great pleasure to introduce this session that have the opportunity to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the share of UAM-Accenture in economic and management business. We have the pleasure to have the professor Hal Varian to participate in this session. Thank you very much, Professor Varian. And we have also the opportunity after the talk of Professor Varian to discuss a little bit about the real problem of innovation in the interaction between academic and society. To introduce the session of my colleague Paloma Sanchez. Please, Paloma.
Thank you, Rector. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, dear Rector, dear General Director, dear Professor Varian, dear President of Accenture and of the Chair, ladies and gentlemen. You can probably guess how honored and flattered I am at this very minute. 10 years ago, when I asked Juan Pedro Moreno, then in charge of Accenture's International Financial Affairs, to support the chair and be its president, I could not imagine we would celebrate such an important event, our 10th anniversary, with such prestigious guests. Looking back, we've done a lot of work. I'm not going to talk about the work the chair has done. Our annual reports are a good account for it. And all that has been possible because of you, Juan Pedro, because of your permanent help and trust, and because of you, Rector, and all the university institutions that have supported us in all our activities. We would not be here without you. I also want to thank the chair members, both from the university and from Accenture. We have worked very hard to get to where we are now. No matter how much I would thank all of you, it would not be enough to express all my gratitude. It is this common effort between Accenture, the university institutions, and the chairpersons that have made possible the visit of Professor Hal Varian. It is quite something to have him here as a keynote speaker. We have also another esteemed guest today, the General Director of Research, Development and Innovation of the Ministry of Science. As you know, Nadia Calviño, the now Vice President of the government, had promised us to join, to be here. But she is attending the first cabinet meeting of this new legislative period. I'm very grateful to Teresa for having accepted to speak with such short notice. As you may know, it has been the chair's main objective during all these years to study and strengthen the relations between companies, academic institutions, and government. It means a lot to us to have both of you represent part of this triumvirate today. Thank you all so much. It is my pleasure now to introduce Professor Hal Varian. Hal, if you don't mind. Hal's two current positions are the following. He is not one, but three emeritus professor positions at Berkeley University, at three departments of Berkeley University. And he's also a chief economist of Google. I'm sure you realize that you don't get to those places without having done an enormous amount of work during all your life. He's particularly well known for his writings in microeconomics. Some of his textbooks have been translated into 22 languages. He is, according to Google Scholar, among the 30 most cited economists in history. It would take me too much time, as you can imagine, to mention all the honors and awards he has received throughout his career. But I would like to highlight two. First, something which is very dear for academic people. He has received honorary doctorates from the University of Oulu in Finland and from the Karlsruhe University in Germany. To be Doctor Honoris Causa reflects a high recognition from your peers, from the academic community. And second, he is also a high-standing person among business practitioners. Juan Pedro, you probably know that Hal is included in Accenture's list of 50 business intellectuals. That's a good list to be on. So Hal, as I said before, has done much work. And that work requires, no doubt, a bit of inspiration, but a lot of perspiration. To end this introduction, let me say a few words about today's theme. The invitation to this event reads triple, quadruple helix panel. What does it mean? The term triple helix model of innovation was coined in the middle of the 90s, and it refers to the following. We can't improve innovation. We will not transform innovation into economic growth and social development if the academy, represented here by the rector, the government, represented by the general director, and the industry, represented by Accenture's CEO, do not interact, do not work together. But why quadruple? Which is the fourth helix of the model? It is all of you, the society. We know now that these four entities have to interact, societal problems solving, which are growing in complexity. These four elements have gained, paradoxically, both autonomy and dependency to each other along the last years. And the only way forward is for these four elements, for these four groups, to understand and analyze problems together and collaborate in the definition and implementation of innovative solutions to those societal problems. What does it mean to live in a world where artificial intelligence is prevalent? Robots, as Hal is going to talk about in a minute. How will we understand innovation in a context of climate crisis? Answers to these questions are still beyond us, but the relations between those four helices, those four actors, will determine our ability to provide the answers and our capacity to shape the world we will live in the future. It is under this relationship as a framework that we want to tackle today's theme, socioeconomic challenges of the digital revolution, with this very prestigious panel of speakers. Thank you again, Hal, and thank you, Teresa, for coming. Thank you once more, Juan Pedro, for everything. Thank you, Rector, for hosting us today, and thank you very much, all of you, for coming. Thank you. Excuse me, can I ask you to put down your telephone just in case, please?
Especially me. Well, thank you so much for that kind introduction. It's really a great honor to be here to reflect on the role of the Accenture Chair and innovation at the university and in the world as a whole. So I want to talk today about a particular aspect of that innovation that has raised a lot of concerns in the last few years, and that's the role of automation and labor markets. And what I want to do today is tie together some of the views about automation and procreation, that is, the role of demographic effects in labor markets. So let me, this title, The Automation of Procreation, I decided that was a little pretentious, so I created a shorter, much shorter title. It's called Bots and Tots. What is the connection between the Automation Society and the demographics, which I think is very important and rather does not receive sufficient attention. So my goal in this discussion is to describe some of the issues and maybe encourage people to think more and more deeply about this relationship. So you may recognize this diagram. It's been in a few of my textbooks. Demand for labor, supply of labor, acting together to determine the wage rate and employment level. And the simplest way to describe the impact of automation is to argue that there will be a reduction in the demand for human labor because of the substitution with robotics and artificial intelligence and these new technologies that are proceeding very rapidly in terms of economic impact. But the story should not stop there, because we aren't just looking at the demand side for labor, we're also concerned about the supply side of labor. So we would expect to see the supply curve shift as well due to demographic effects. Virtually every advanced economy these days is facing something of a demographic crisis, and what you should care about is the interaction between the shifting in the demand curve due to technology and the shifting of the supply curve due to demographics. I like to say that's the theory part of my talk, so I want to turn now to the empirical side and first look at the bots, and then we can look at the tots. So on the bot side, a lot of attention is being paid to the problem of job loss due to automation. Here's a story, a recent story from 2016. Smart robots could soon steal your job. Go back a few years, 1980, a robot is after your job. Go back to 1960, robots rise, they bid for big jobs in outer space. And we can go back a little further, 1935, thinking machines replacing the thinker. In fact, we can go back to 1812, a 1,000-pound reward for people wantonly destroying cloth. So there's been a fear of technology that's been around for at least a century or more. And but lately there's been a new theme come in, namely the idea that we're seeing labor shortages in lots of places. So this is particularly true in the US, where there have been fairly significant labor shortages in a number of different areas: construction, agriculture, truck drivers, forklift drivers, dairy farms, meat packing, on and on and on. So why are we seeing this fear of robots, fear of automation? At the same time, we're all seeing serious shortages in at least certain categories of labor. Now, a lot of people believe that this is primarily a macroeconomic phenomenon. We live in a period where there's been a hot economy in some countries at least, and that effect will eventually disappear. But I'm not so sure. I think that when you look at the underlying structural forces of demographic change, it may be, and I think in fact it's likely there will be a period of tight labor markets for several years. So let's look at the 20th century. There were two very large shocks to the labor market. One of those shocks was the baby boomers. So if you look at this chart, this is showing what birth rates look like during the Depression in the 30s. We saw the baby dearth. There was a reduction in the number of children. After World War II, we saw this huge baby boom, followed by a baby bust, again, falling. And then 20 years later, so we saw the echo of the baby boom, when all those baby boom parents had children. And so we see this nice demographic cycle. And I will say, demography is one of the very few social scientists where you can really talk about predictions 10 or even 20 years in the future. I don't think we can do that in economics or technology, innovation, but demography is a bit of a different story. So that was the first big shock, and then the second shock was women entering the labor force. I should say the paid labor force, because women have always had plenty of work. It's just that it was in the household sector and typically not part of the paid labor force. But we saw a really very dramatic change, and both of these changes, the baby boomers and the role of women in the labor force, came at the same time, the 1960s and early 1970s. So we saw a double effect at that period. But that's not going to be repeated, because if you look at the chart I just showed you, after the baby boom came the baby bust. So we're seeing a reduction in the number of new workers. And of course, women's participation in the labor market is already something like 85% in the US or higher. So that's pretty much asymptoting to a high level of participation. So what that suggests then is that the future, which was driven, I think, by these the past, which was driven by these two effects, is not necessarily going to be a reliable guide to the future because of the effects I just mentioned. Now, when you look at labor markets and you try to think about the impact of technology on labor markets, it's natural to consider two different dimensions: jobs on the one hand and tasks on the other. So the idea is a job is described by a set of tasks which are necessary to perform in that job. So for example, when you look at automation, you don't necessarily eliminate jobs, you eliminate the dull, tedious, and repetitive tasks that go into those jobs. So if you look at manual labor, during many centuries, a lot of work has been devoted to mundane tasks like washing clothes and drying dishes and mowing lawns and digging holes and chopping wood and so on. Not only those kinds of manual labor are important, but also cognitive labor, where you make change for purchases, memorize maps, add up columns of numbers, things that are tasks that are necessary to perform particular jobs. And if you eliminate all the tasks associated with a job, you've eliminated the job. But that's really quite rare, because usually those tasks move around to different job categories. So for example, Jim Besson, an economist at Boston University, observed that there were 270 detailed occupations in the 1950 census, and only one of those has actually been eliminated due to automation. So what could that be? Elevator operator. Right? I mean, when I was a kid, the elevators had a human who moved the levers and made the elevator go up and down. But even the elevator operator had other tasks. It wasn't just operating the elevator. In fact, there were safety monitors, security monitors, greeting people, answering questions, providing services to residents, announcing special offers in retail stores, and so on. Those tasks still exist. That's the important point. People greet you, people do security. When I went to the Google building, this high-rise tower, there was a whole procedure of talking to 2 or 3 different groups of people to be able to find the offices. So those tasks, which once might be handled simply by a human, the elevator operator, they're now divided up among security people, receptionists, and so on. Now, most jobs are like this. They're more complicated than we think. They may have a title that reflects one aspect of the job, but the actual tasks associated with the job are more complex. So think about a job of being a gardener, somebody who takes care of your flowers and mows your lawn and that sort of thing. There's an online service provided by the Bureau of Labor Statistics called ONET. And what ONET does is it takes each job category and describes a set of tasks that are important for that job. And it's really quite an interesting read. You could read about the requirements to be a lawyer, or to be a dentist, or to be a waiter, whatever. And typically they involve many tasks like the list on this page. You have to gather and remove litter. You have to operate vehicles or powered equipment, water lawns, prune trees, on and on and on. A whole variety of tasks that going into being a gardener. And this goes on for about 30 different tasks associated with that job. And we tend to think of that as a relatively simple, unskilled job, but it does involve a number of skills. And it's not nearly as simple as I think intellectuals tend to believe. Here's a more list, and there's more lists and more lists. And so every job has a number of complexities. And you might ask, could we automate this? And I think the right answer is you could automate any single tasks with enough money and enough time and enough effort. So raking the lawn to get the leaves off, that certainly could be automated. But automating all of those tasks in order to replace the job category, that would be quite ambitious. It would take you years, decades, in fact, to do this. And robots work best with a standardized environment and repetitive tasks. So you think about the assembly line, the great invention of the 20th century. We have been optimizing the assembly line for 100 years. Think of Henry Ford, 1909. It's an interesting story. Where did Henry Ford get the idea for the assembly line? Well, he actually visited the meatpacking operations in Chicago, where they would take the cow or the pig or whatever, hang it, and then each person along the line would disassemble the cow, okay? They would disassemble it, and Ford said, well, what if we run it in reverse? If they can disassemble a cow, we can assemble a car. And that was the innovation that he recognized to improve the efficiency of assembly work. We've been optimizing that for 100 years, and it's not too surprising that this could be automated, because the whole goal of creating the assembly line is to have one worker doing one task at one place at one time and developing a skill in performing that task, which allowed the assembly to proceed much more quickly. And indeed, half of all industrial robots are in automobile plants. That is a very high proportion, and another 25 to 30% are in consumer electronics assembly. And the way this has been able to work is by having standardized parts, standardized operations, standardized environment to make the work proceed smoothly. And as soon as you have a heterogeneous environment, where there's lots of variation in lawns and trees and all the kinds of things associated with being a groundskeeper, then the problem becomes complex. In fact, we were talking this morning about autonomous vehicles, driverless cars, big challenge for the 20th century. But if you think about it, if you took all of the cars out of Madrid and all of the pedestrians out of Madrid, it would be easy to navigate through the town, right? The problem is the environment. It's the problem is the other drivers. That's the problem, and the pedestrians. Because the autonomous vehicle is easy, but predicting what other people will do is really quite hard. All right, and it's, in fact, we have had driverless tractors for at least a decade, because if you have a specific plot of land where you know the dimensions, you know the tasks, you've got the simple rectangular farm, for example, then there's really no problem in having autonomous vehicles. They can work just fine. So here's my example. If you wanted to have a robot gardener, well, there's the perfect garden because it's a very uniform and standardized environment, ideal environment for the robots. And to use another agricultural example, I grew up in an orchard, an apple orchard. And our orchard looked something like the picture on the left, where we had these apple trees who were quite tall, 20 feet tall. You had to get there via ladders. The apples grew all over the trees. And really, only humans could pick apples because they're very delicate and easy to bruise. Apples, peaches, plums, pears, strawberries, raspberries. All of those soft fruits are very difficult because they require a gentle touch. But what do apple orchards look like today? Well, there's a picture on the right. The trees are only 6 or 7 feet tall. They only grow apples on one side of the tree, so you don't have to go around the tree to pick them. You can just pick them from one side. They prune them back so the apples are easy to find in the tree, and the whole effort is making the environment standardized. Once you've made the environment completely standardized, that makes it easy for humans and, of course, for the machines. And so now there are machines that are able to harvest some of these fruits without doing undue damage, but that's only because they modified the environment in a way that made that amenable. Just like taking all the cars out of Madrid and all the pedestrians out, it would make it a lot easier. Standardizing the environment for the food production can be made much easier as well. So, of course, this raises the question of what tasks can be automated, and how will tasks change, how will jobs change, training, labor markets, all of these things, because when we automate certain aspects of driving or of farming, whatever, there can be many different estimates of how many of those tasks will actually be successfully automated, which depends, as I said, on standardizing the environment in a way that makes it feasible for robotic work. And there's a great deal of divergent views on this question. Oxford University said, well, it could be 45% of the jobs. And PricewaterhouseCoopers said, well, maybe around 35%. The OECD says 10%. And so there's a great divergence in views about what is really capable of being automated. This is an estimate from Technology Review, where they tried to summarize all of these different forecasts for the impact of automation on the labor force. But what happens is you will still, even if you could succeed in automating a number of those tasks, you would still have to have investment. I think significant investment in education and training will still be necessary because, as we all know, there's a very strong effect of education in labor markets. The unemployment rate is shown in the blue on the left, less than a high school diploma, 7.4% unemployment rate among people who did not graduate from high school, but a 1.6% unemployment from people with a doctorate degree. And of course, the wages are much higher for educated workers. So the training and education is a critical part of understanding the labor market. Can technology help deliver on-the-job skill training as necessary? So what we sometimes call just-in-time learning, where you're learning the task that's relevant to the technology that you are trying to deploy. Not only can technology deliver that kind of on-the-job training, I would say it already does. If you look at YouTube, every day there are 1 billion views of how-to videos on YouTube. And that's everything from how to bake a cake, to how to play a guitar, to how to weld, to how to calculate, solve quadratic equations, on and on and on. This gigantic variety of skills. And I will bet that nearly everyone in this audience has accessed some video that gives them some education and training in how to perform an unfamiliar task. So obviously, that's only a piece of the story of how education and training can be delivered. But I think it's unprecedented in human history, because historically, these instructional materials have always been costly and rare. And now they're ubiquitous, available to anyone on an as-needed basis, for free, delivered through this nice, friendly device, your mobile phone. In fact, maybe you can turn your phones back on and access a few of the videos and do some training while we're sitting here, but maybe that's not a good idea. But it is quite remarkable that now we have access to a huge amount of training material, and the kids understand this. If the kid falls asleep in class and misses the talk on solving quadratic equations, they can go home and go to YouTube and they can find dozens of videos that explain that logic. So I think this fact that there's so much education available for free on an as-needed basis is really going to have profound effects on labor markets in the future. And here's some examples. Here I picked some cognitive skills from the Khan Academy: pre-algebra, statistics and probability, differential equations, computer science. You can get a remarkably deep understanding of computer science by accessing these titles on YouTube. But, important point, it's not just the cognitive skills, it's also the manual skills. So here's a sample of YouTube videos I pulled up. Here, you've got the how to install a door, how to weld cast iron, how to remove a strip bolt, all these things that are, in fact, tasks involving manual labor, but skills that are necessary to utilize that labor effectively. Now, it used to be that being a cashier, you had to know how to make change. And to be a writer, you had to know how to spell. Thank God we don't have that worry anymore. Being a taxi driver meant you had to know city streets, how to get around town. A hospitality worker, you had to know a little bit of foreign languages, and so on and so on. And so there was a set of skills that we required for a job, and people may or may not have had those skills. So when you think about the employer wanting a skill level here and the applicants for the job here, there's two ways to solve that problem. You can bring the employer up to the right level through the education and training, or you can make the job easier by incorporating automation to address some of these issues. Nobody makes change anymore. They always have a computer or a calculator or something that does that for them. The word processor automatically checks your spelling. The taxi driver gets around by using an automated map. And so you reduce the entry barriers to the job by outsourcing some of the cognitive skills to computers and automation. And this, of course, is going to continue because not necessarily replacing the job, but making the job simpler by offloading some of the dull, tedious, and repetitive tasks, like making change. So my point is that the demand for labor and the supply of labor are both very important. The automation commonly replaces tasks, rarely replaces jobs, and that's led to generally more jobs and less work, which is a good thing. So let me turn now to saying a few words about demography. If we look at productivity, namely output per hour, there's a nice identity that is output per hour worked. there's a nice identity. Output per person is output per hour times hours per worker times workers per person. And we can look at how this is developing in today's economy. In the US, we have pretty much full employment. It's hard to imagine much higher employment rate than what we're experiencing now. I think it's the highest employment rate in 30 years, 40 years, really quite remarkable. Participation rate, on the other hand, people are participating in the labor market, that's going down. That's primarily due to aging and retirement. And if we look at productivity, just the technological effect of how much output per hour we've seen relatively anemic growth. So if you look at output per person has not been growing as dramatically as it's like, primarily because there's little headroom left on employment, the participation rate is declining, and we're not seeing the productivity growth that we had hoped for, at least. Several of you may have seen a diagram like this showing total factor productivity, where we had a period of relatively slow growth in the 70s up to the 90s. We had this nice period of rapid growth during the 90s, but now we've leveled off again to relatively slow growth rate. But, of course, that's the primary way that we're going to get increased output is by improving the productivity, because we're not going to get much help from the, let's see here, from the employment level or the participation rates. So let me show you a picture on the growth of the labor force. This is US data. Notice that the 2020s, the decade we just entered a few weeks ago, is going to have the slowest growth in the labor force ever recorded since in the post-war period. And then the 2030s and the 2040s are not much higher. So the growth of the labor force is going to be a constraining factor in terms of growth of the economy, and that growth of the labor force is coming from the dynamics I described earlier of the baby boom followed by the baby bust, followed by lower birth rates, population growth, immigration, et cetera, et cetera. So this is, I think, a very important chart to understand that the future of the labor market is going to be quite different than the past. We aren't going to see the huge shocks that we saw in the 70s from entry into the labor market. We're seeing exactly the reverse, a very slow growth in the labor market. And they sometimes say demography is destiny. There's the chart I showed you earlier. Chart below is looking at the growth rate in the population compared to the growth rate in the labor force. And for the next 30 years, we would expect to see the labor force growing at a slower rate than the population, which is really quite different than what we saw historically. And without immigration, you would see an absolute decline in the labor force in the US. All the participation rates are going down. As men, women, whatever, they're retiring, stepping out of the labor market. And every one of those individuals that retires, that withdraws from the labor market, they expect to continue consuming for obvious reasons. So where's the consumption come from? It has to come from the working part of the population, and they're getting to be a smaller and smaller number. This is a little picture again of the US. I am going to talk about Spain in a minute. This is geographically, the impact of demography is going to be quite different. In the northern part of the US, we're going to see significantly aging populations without enough younger people to do the required work. In a few states like Nevada, Utah, Texas, and so on, we're going to see a younger labor force because you're seeing this migration from one state to another, and that's going to, of course, impact the availability of labor in those states. Skip that. Oh, yes. And the U.S. is in good shape compared to many countries. This is the dependency ratio. So dependency ratio is the number of people over 65 for every 100 people of working age, okay? And if you look at the Japan, it's in really terrible shape in terms of this dependency ratio. But look at the next country is Spain. So Spain is going to have a remarkably high dependency ratio in the next few decades. And what that means is that we should be welcoming automation, which can help deal with the fact that there's going to be a definite shortage of workers. The other tool you have, of course, is immigration. We know immigration is very highly politicized, and so there are limits in terms of what can be accomplished there. But as you look through this list, you see Japan, Spain, Korea, which is also in a very, very bad position, Italy, Germany, France, Finland, right down the list. And the U.S., as I mentioned, is doing better than most in this case. One country that's a bit of a surprise, all the countries I mentioned were developed countries, but look at China, which you would still want to describe, I think, as developing economy. Because of the one-child policy, they had a very difficult demographic challenge in the ensuing years. Here's a little picture of what China population growth looks like, where the one-child policy is introduced. They're about a third of the way through, and now, of course, they're trying to get 2 children per family, 3 children per family, because of this looming labor force. In fact, China is really forced to invest very heavily in artificial intelligence and robotics because of the looming labor shortages from these policies that they pursued several decades ago. And the U.S. birth rate is at an all-time low. So typically, when you have a recession, the birth rate goes down because people feel they can't afford children in a bad economy. When the recession ends, the birth rate goes back up. Not this time. Not this time. It's quite remarkable. The birth rate has remained very, very low, and that could, of course, exacerbate the problems of facing the aging population. And no matter how productive you are, it takes 20 years to produce a 20-year-old. So you're not going to have a big turnaround in this demographic problem anytime soon. So the next 30 years are going to be, I think, quite difficult in terms of the supply curve or the supply of labor. So what does that mean? Robotics is going to be necessary. Here's a picture of the world, the annual supply of industrial robots. China is at the very leading edge there because they recognize this looming labor force shortage, followed by Japan, Korea, US, Germany, and so on. So the very countries that are experiencing the demographic effects of the slower growth in the labor force or decline in the labor force are the ones that naturally are investing the most heavily in robotics, because that's really the only solution, I think, that's really going to be effective. Okay, so remember my demand curve and supply curve back in the first couple pages. Which curve is going to shift the most? Is it going to be the reduction in the demand for labor will be larger than the reduction in the supply, or vice versa? Because that's what we think will impact the wage rate. Which curve is shifting the most? If you look at a study by the Boston Consulting Group, in their aggressive scenario for deployment of automation, they claim that the employment population ratio might decline by 1.76% in the next decade. Okay? The Bureau of Labor Statistics, on the other hand, looks at the employment to population ratio change due to the demographic effects on the supply side. That's about a 2.7% change. So you see much larger change coming from the change in demographics than you do coming from the change in technology, at least based on these estimates. So what does that suggest? That says you're going to see tight labor markets. That suggests rising wages, increased incentives for employers to economize on labor, and increased demand by workers for more flexible hours as well, because not everybody will necessarily want to work a 40-hour work week. So when we step back from all of these popular articles, or popular press articles about the looming threat of automation, my view is exactly the opposite. Given the demographic effects that we expect to see in the developed world, the problem that's going to be the most pressing problem, in my view, is going to be the labor shortages. And that's not only overall, but also in these specific categories where special skills, training, and education are necessary. But overall, I'm optimistic because it would be, I think, a good time to see rising wages, would be a good time to see high employment rates. So all of the problems that we faced in the last few decades of having unemployment and stagnant wages may well turn around over the next several decades. So that should leave you with a optimistic conclusion. But there's still a little pessimistic side as well, namely as retirees age, they become more costly. So you're going to have to produce more in the health sector, have more productivity there to allow people to live out full and meaningful lives. So the promise of having more jobs, higher wages, I think that's likely outcome, but we're also going to have this very costly sector of healthcare that is going to be a big problem moving forward. So I think that's a good place to end, and I'm happy to take questions. Thank you. Do we have time for questions or discussion? How are we going to do it?
Discussion?
Discussion?
Do you think we can let the discussion
Yes, yes.
till everybody has talked? Because
Excellent.
the other three members of the panel may talk now, you may talk afterwards,
Okay.
and have an exchange of opinions among you.
Sounds
Okay,
good.
That's correct?
Okay.
Okay.
Go sit down.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Varian, for this inspiring talk, and also with this optimistic view for all of us, because the problem you have discussed really is a problem that society are scared a little bit about that. So it's been very great to listen to you. So the next part of the session is a panel discussing the triple and quadruple helix that has been presented by Professor Paloma Sanchez. And we participates Teresa Riesgo, the General Director of Research, Development and Innovation of the government of our country. Thank you very much, Teresa, to be here. It's a pleasure to have you here in this panel. Also, the President of the Accenture Spain, Juan Pedro Moreno. Thank you very much, Juan Pedro. Juan Pedro, as you probably know, most of you know, is a close collaborator of our university as the UAM-Accenture chair for many years. Thank you very much, Juan Pedro. And also Professor Varian and myself. If you agree, we can make a short presentation of our view that represent the different aspects of these helixes, the public sector and the administration represented by Teresa, the private sector, the enterprise and the industry represented by Juan Pedro Moreno, the academy represented by me in this case, and also the society and the general view represented by Professor Varian. We can make the presentation and the opinion in this order if you agree. So Teresa, if you would like to start with your view of the triple and quadruple helix and the problem of innovation with the interaction of these actors.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, I want to tell you happy birthday, because this 10th anniversary, I think it's very relevant and very important for this discussion that we are having today, because you are a very good example of that. Yeah. At least of the double helix, yeah, in that part, yeah. But so I will try to introduce a little bit which can be the role of this third part, that is the public administration, and also to see how the citizens and the society has to be involved in all these ideas of innovation and research. And thank you very much for your talk. It has been very inspiring for me. I like it very much. And I have taken a lot of notes of things that that I will use to convince people that innovation is important and interesting, and they are not stealing the jobs. Yeah? Because this is something that we are. I will try to address a little bit later. And thank you, the rector, for hosting this event. I know that it was expected that Nadia Calviño was here, so I am not trying to replace her, you know. This is impossible. But you know that today it's an important day because it's starting the new government. So we are in a situation that I think it's very positive and very interesting for trying to change the things we want to change. So it's much better than 1 month ago that we had no idea of what was happening. So it's interesting that we are in that situation. On the other side, in the terms of the innovation policies, we are also in a very interesting place, I say, in the time, particularly in Spain and in Europe, because as you know, the strategic agendas and roadmaps for research and innovation are changing next year in 2021, because maybe you are more aware of the European program that is called H2020, Horizon 2020, and it finishes this year, of course. And so the new program is expected to start in 2021 until 2027, which is a long way, and it's already very much defined, very much involving innovation and taking, I say, everything as a whole, in a very interesting way. And at the same time, in Spain, we are developing our agenda for this period, for 21-27, because the one we have now, the strategic agenda, is covering until this year. So we are this is also very positive. So we have new ideas we want to develop for accelerating all the things related with the innovation and the I say that Spain can take a leading role in many fields in this part of research and innovation. We know, as I will address a little bit the problems that you know that, we all know, and I think it's interesting. There's some, so we are in a good place. Yes, we are in the starting point, so we are just waiting to start the race, and this is very challenging on the one side, but we have opportunities. It's much worse when you are at the end of the period and you are just taking, notes that everything was not working as you wanted and so on. So this is what we want, or we plan to do. On the other side, we have the fourth part of this quadruple helix that we have to take care of, yeah, which is the society. In last week, COTEC, which is for Hal that maybe you don't know, is a Spanish think tank, I would say, about innovation. They published a study about the implication or the perception of innovation by the society in Spain, yeah, with a number of interviews to many people, and they observed that in this study they said that 7 out of 10 of the Spanish citizens have a positive perception of innovation. If we consider this, we can say this is okay, this is more or less okay. But the thing is that in 2017 it was 9 out of 10. So this has decreased. Yeah, this is a little bit worrying, I would say. And if we see which is the part of the population that has decreased most, is younger people from 18 to 29 with lower incomes and with lower education profiles, which is very much in line to what you have been, Hal has been telling us, and about these fears of the society of what is the innovation. Because if we ask in this auditorium about what do you think, I say, we have a secret poll and we say, okay, what is the perception of the innovation? I would say 10 out of 10 would say this is positive, yeah, because I say this is demonstrated in every country that we can say. But one of our roles, I say all of us, and particularly us in the public administration, is to convince these 3 out of 10 people that are thinking that innovation is not positive, they don't have a positive perception, is to convince them that it is positive, because we need to get the society in the system. Yeah. So this is one thing. I say the study of Cotec is very interesting, and there are many data. It's published on the web, so you can see it there. So what is the role that we can do by the policymakers? One thing, of course, is we know. I say we have a list of to-dos. Yeah, well, that's very, and we know it very well. One is that we have to increase the public funding. We have to attract more private funding to research and innovation activities. We have to decrease bureaucracy. We have to generate new talent and, I say, increase the support to the talent generation, particularly to universities in Spain. So we know the topics, yeah. But we need another thing more that is involving the society in that. And for that, Europe has, in Horizon Europe, there are appearing new ways of facing the innovation or encouraging the innovation, and they are part of these strategic approaches that Europe is proposing, and also we are proposing in Spain. One that is very well known, at least in the policy, in the innovation policies, is what is called the mission innovation, mission-based innovation, which tries to, is something that is, everybody talks about that, and what it tries to do is to drive from the public administrations to the innovators, I mean, including researchers, I say everybody in the field, trying to put them together to work towards a real societal problem with a deadline, as I saying, okay, we want to decrease for example, the deaths by this and this type of cancer in, I say, 80% in 2027. This is something that is more or less what is that they are trying to do. This is one thing that requires the participation of the citizens, of the society. So this is one thing that is very important. So we are not just promoting science and innovation that is just for me, yeah, that is for the fun of a researcher, a basic researcher, yeah, for this type of things, or for the benefit of the economic benefit of a given company, but also that everybody is coordinated to solve real problems in a given time. This is one thing that is very important. But this is not the only thing, because we need to generate also competitiveness, increase the competitiveness of the companies. We need to increase the competitiveness also of the public administration, which is sometimes getting very, very old, yeah, in many things. And we are trying to put it as an innovator itself. And also, don't forget that we need excellent science to fuel all these things. So at the end, my point is, what can we do as public administrator? We can fuel the system. And to fuel the system, we need to bridge build the bridges that are in between these four parts that can not be isolated anymore. Yeah? So I know that the theory is very easy. The practical is not that easy, because at the end, what we can do are taking particular measures, yeah, to do, we can fund this, or we can promote these activities in the university professors, for example, to increase the awareness of innovation, and also to trying to convince the citizens that this is positive. So in the next study of COTEC, we can find 10 out of 10 with a positive perception of innovation. So this is more or less my point. Thank you very much for the invitation again. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Teresa. Juan Pedro.
So good morning, and thanks again for giving us the opportunity once again to share with this distinguished public the views of the chair and the work we do in the chair. No? The world is changing very fast, and there are many things changing the world. No? And I think Professor Varian just suggested in his speech something about dramatic changes that are taking place in the economy, like the rise of the gray-hair economy just behind your words. No? The gray-hair economy is going to be a reality. We will face an economy where older people will have a say. They won't be just retired workers. They will do many things, and also they will accumulate not only the talent but also the wealth. No, so I think this is something to reflect on. We have here a very good example I would like to honor, which is our director of the chair. She is retired, but she's still very active, as you could see. And we have to thank Paloma for the ability to convince Professor Varian to come here today, which is not an easy thing, I can promise, to have such a relevant character here with us today. No? I think, and continuing with your words, Professor, I like to share with you a joke, no? That we say here in Spain, no? Saying the factory of the future is through the automation will automate many jobs. But it's true that the factory of the future, there will be only two jobs there. One will be the security guy, and the other one will be a dog. The dog will be keeping the factory away from burglars and people trying to enter there, and the security guy to feed the dog. No? So the world is changing and will change very, very, very fast. And as you described, there will be many professions remaining and many professions changing. I wouldn't say disappear. And I think it's our duty, the four parts of the helix here represented today, to convey how to transform the society, especially from the education point of view, to this new world and new society. No? The other element I would like to highlight is, as you mentioned, as well, it's true that we need to help citizens to understand the impact of this change and accept innovation as probably the driver of the economy. My words today will focus on this part specifically, the citizens part, because from my point of view, there is an interesting dichotomy today in the society between workers and citizens. We are all workers, but also we are all citizens. But we don't behave the same when we feel we are workers and when we feel we are citizens. As workers, we fear changes in the labor market and menaces, probably not very well justified, about the risk of the labor market to go down. That I completely share the view of Professor Varian. I think your pragmatic view and very well fundamented is what we need really to disclose to the society and be very factual as you were. So we will have a more positive view on what's going on. But when we split this dichotomy, employees or workers and citizens, it's funny because Mrs. Riesgo, when we have interviewed people here in Spain, asking, for instance, if they realize when they talk on the phone, if they are talking with a robot or a human being, 48% of the people responding declare not realizing whether they were talking to a robot or a human being. But more importantly, out of the 52% saying they did recognize they were talking to a robot, 78% declare they prefer talking to a robot. Similarly, on the workers' point of view, more than 76% of the workers interviewed in the US by Accenture declare they embrace artificial intelligence in their own jobs as an improvement. And they really believe this will give a better opportunity to them to continue performing in a better way. So I think it's completely different to ask workers and citizens. Citizens are really embracing this innovation and this new society. And why is that? No? I think technology has forced a dramatic change in the economy. We are assisting to a change in the economy. We like to say is the economy of experience, no? Where a consumer, a citizen, not only decides, like in the industrial economy, based upon price or quality of the goods they are consuming, we more and more decide based on the experience we are receiving from the product, the service, or the relationship with a particular brand. There are many, many examples. Google is one of those examples. We all love Google because the experience that Google is providing us is instantaneous, is fast, it gives you the right answer. Artificial intelligence is helping us really to go direct to the answer we are trying to find. Similarly, when we buy something in Amazon, no? Nobody, I guess, is buying in Amazon products today because they are better or cheaper, because they are the same than what you can buy in the shop. And in more than 90% of the cases, you can always find something at similar price or even cheaper in the surrounding 5 kilometers where you live. No? So why are we doing this? Because we love the experience. It's fast, one click, you can return things, they bring you at home. It takes 20 minutes in some places like New York to bring it home. Here, it takes in the best case 2 hours or 1 day or 2 days to be delivered. No? Society is taking advantages very fast of the innovation brought by technology. This is the reality. And we all enjoy a lot this progress and this advance. And this progress in today's world can be achieved with a number of changes we are doing in the productive structure of our economy. One change, clear change to cope in this economy of experience is clearly investing on innovation. Innovation is really the driver that is moving ahead the economy and moving us so fast into this economy of experience. How to be competitive in this new economy is a matter of being innovative. And why is that? First of all, because being innovative today means being able to use technology and ideas and talent in favor of the hyper-personalization of products and services. We as consumers, as citizens, we no longer want a product. We no longer want a service. We want our product. We want our service. Specifically tailored and designed for us. Because technology today allows us to do it and provides a much better service and a much better experience for us. So why not? So hyper-personalization becomes today a key criteria to decide what we buy or what we purchase in the shops. If not, just close your eyes and think how many times have you taken your kids to a shop trying to find a can of Coca-Cola with their names. Why you buy the Coca-Cola that says Jaime or Alberto or my grandmother in the can? Is the Coca-Cola better? Is different? Is cheaper? You like it because it's personalized. And in fact, you can personalize today in the website a Coca-Cola can with your name or whatever you want to put there to celebrate whatever you want, and it's very cheap. This, only 15 years ago, it was impossible, because really to personalize a can of Coke with your name would have taken to stop the production chain, changing the stamps, running for at least one day the production engine, produce 500,000 cans of Coca-Cola with your name, and then coming back to the standard Coca-Cola cans. This would be impossible. This was really impossible at a reasonable price 15 years ago. Today, with digital printing, you can do series of one can of Coke. Similar with cars. Only 3% of the BMWs we drive around the world are similar to each other. Only 3%. So we are in the world of hyper-personalization, driven by innovation embedded into the technology we are serving. The other element that is changing into this economy of experience is really the platforms world, the collaborative economy, where we all work with others, trying to gather and prescribe services that bundle together in a better experience for consumers. You see every day the platform works in every industry you are seeing. You see it in the transportation business, you see it in the retail business, you see it in the healthcare industry. No industries are free from this disruption that the platform economy is bringing, because it really entitles us to bundle products and services and hyper-personalize, again, what we are doing. So technology is not only at the service of increasing productivity, although it's not growing at the speed we would like, and automating jobs, but also technology is at the service of serving this new society we are creating, that we enjoy every single day and every single morning. The other element of this new economy is the use of data. With the use of data, we get these personalized products and services, we get this hyper-personalization we are expecting, and we are obtaining very, very good results out of it. Same with artificial intelligence. No? Probably not many people on this debate of using data knows that today, with public data posted into the platforms, Facebook, Google, and many other platforms, LinkedIn or whatever, we can obtain very good results to improve the way we live in the society. For instance, analyzing the data posted in Facebook is the best predictor of young people's suicide. Is the best predictor. And this is thanks to technology and the use of platforms to do that. No? So we are in a society where technology is improving very fast the way we live. I would say probably the society today lives better than ever. It can be any other way. I recommend everyone the book Factfulness. I don't know if you have read that. There is a book that tries to demonstrate that we live in the society, as Professor Varian showed with his historical collection of news in the newspapers, that we live in a world where we took a picture in the 60s that represent a cliche of how the society is working. So if we close our eyes, we tend to think that in Africa nobody goes to school. If we close our eyes, we tend to think that the ozone layer of the atmosphere is thinner and thinner and thinner. All fake news. The world is today much better than ever. People goes in school, in the secondary school in Africa with the same percentage rate that in the UK. Exactly the same. And the ozone layer is thicker than ever today, again. So we need to embrace change, I think, and we need to live with it. The flip side of this change is what it brings us here to the university. What's the role of the university on innovation and this transformation of society? In Accenture, we foresee clearly something that you also suggested in your speech, which is this augmented worker. It's not the bots replacing the humans, it's really creating augmented workers. Workers that will be able to be more productive and doing more things, and especially with more value added than what they do. Technology will be embedded into the artificial intelligence. Technology will be embedded into the machinery we will be using. Technology and knowledge will be embedded into all this media you just described. You can be educated in technical things very easily. But the world, the new world, will be demanding new skills, and we will be demanding new attitudes on our future workers. Today we are observing that the demand we are perceiving in the workers, in the, let's say, knowledge worker business, is changing dramatically. We are not demanding that many technical skills like we used to do in the past. We need engineers. Of course we need engineers. But we don't need engineers for everything. Because engineering will be embedded into the robot's mind. Engineering will be embedded into an augmented reality glasses. Engineering can be embedded into the videos that Professor Varian just showed us. So it will be easier to be close to the technical knowledge and to the technical skills. What do we need then in the future worker? We need to come back to make sure that our future workers will be equipped with very human abilities and skills. We need to come back to the idea that more than ever, I think we will demand people that has been trained on empathy, human relationships, society rules, values, history, humanities. All those things become more and more important for the worker of the future. And from our point of view in Accenture, what we see is that similarly that these boundaries of the industry is melting down, where we see supply energy companies providing mobility and cars, retailers providing insurance, banks selling alarms, we will see a new university and schools providing more and more combined skills, technical and what we call soft skills, together creating these new workers of the future. Because of course we will need, and I think Spain is very proud of being a country with very good scientists and with an amazing talent around technical background. But we are not that good on soft skills. Very easy things. The worker of the future need to be bilingual in, I wouldn't say only in English, but in different languages. The worker of the future need to be a worker that is able to create empathy, because robots will never do it. The worker of the future need to have very high social skills in everything they would do. And this is not new. I mean, the worker that worked in that elevator that Professor Varian described just needed to know how to play the levers. Now this worker has been posed as the bell captain in the hotel and needs to interact with the hosts of the hotel. So his social skills need to improve. So I think the job of this helix, these 4 parts, is amazingly important in these days if we want to remain a competitive country. To be a competitive country is not only, from my point of view, a matter of being very innovative. To be innovative is a matter of changing the rules on how do we educate people. It's changing the rules on how we interact, corporations and universities. It is a matter, why not, of making the government very open on the policies to really understand what the needs of the future are, to attract that investments and that capital you mentioned. I mean, and I finish with that, I think as an executive of a multinational, I always like to say, fighting in a multinational for $1 investment in this country is a serious matter. It's a serious matter. You need to compete for every dollar with many countries that also raise their hands and say, this is a very good country to invest. So fighting for each dollar, everything counts. Relationship with the university, research, policies, stability, all these things matters. And I think working together is really the answer for the future, more than ever, I would say. To end with a positive thought, I think on that Spain is very well positioned. Not only because we have a very good technical background, that is true, but also because on social skills and talent, probably this is one of the countries that clearly exceeds in the workplace. And I think we need to be proud of that, but also we need to react immediately and take advantage of that and put it at work. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Juan Pedro. Well, after these words, for me, it's a little bit difficult to make some new contribution to the role of university to this new society dominated by the advantages, not only in the technical field, in technology, but in many fields. But I would like to contribute with some ideas. One of the most popular words that we can listen today from many atmospheres, many environments, from the politician, academic, even the people, the people working in the enterprise and so on, is that we need more than ever a knowledge-based society. This is clear. I have listened to this concept many times in the past few years. We need to build a knowledge-based society. So to do that, it's clear that the role the university and the academy in general needs to be very strong. I mean, the main point, the main place where the knowledge is created is the university or in the research center or in the technological center, but the people dedicated to science to generate knowledge and to put this to the service of the new society. So it's very clear that in this new concept of society and in the interaction in the different players of the quadruple helix, the university may be or needs to be in the core position of the new society. It is very clear. So how to do this? Well, I think that the transformation has been very strong. The role of the university 50 years ago or 60 years ago was completely different than now. Was to try to supply the higher education to the young people to learn some abilities to do or to play a profession in the society. I mean, the lawyers and the medical doctor or the engineer, when they finish the studies, it was popular to say that you have finished to learn something, but you had to put it in practice because you still have no abilities to develop your profession. But you need to, in the case of the medical doctor, you learn a lot in the faculty, but you need to be to the hospital to see the patient and to know how to cope the different problems to try to solve it. But basically, the university was devoted specifically to preserve the knowledge and to convey and transmit the knowledge to the young people to try to make the new professional and insert in the society. But this, as has been discussed today, have changed dramatically in the past year, where the university is demanded not only to try to preserve the knowledge that now is very accessible in many places, but also to play a very important role in the higher education, in the sense that Juan Pedro raised this morning and said, you not only try to make some new abilities and new knowledge, but you have to complete this with soft capacities of the people and the interaction, the empathy, the social relationships, and so on. Is in the first place. In the second place, because the knowledge is now a little bit dispersed in different fields. Even online, you can find knowledge of not as the people say of very low quality in the places. There are many places with a high quality content of the different topics. So the university are not the only reservoir of this knowledge, though they have to change the role in the sense that it's more important every day to try to make a good education in these new capacities and try to develop the intellectual ability of the young people to cope with many different things that even will be changing during the professional life of this the new person that have been inserted in the society. So this implies a very, very dramatic change in the sense and in the scope of the university nowadays that had to transform the plans, the different plans of formation of the people in one way, and in the other way had to be very in contact with the different players that play different roles in the society. I mean, with the private sector, we have said, but also with the society in general. So I would like to introduce 2 or 3 ideas that I think that would be important in the future. First, I believe very much in the ecosystems. That is also a very popular word nowadays. I think that to ascribe this important role only to the university would be a mistake. I think that we need to bet very strongly for create good ecosystem that to live together the academic people, the professor working in the university, integrate the civic person working in the enterprise and industry, and also integrate in this ecosystem, of course, the research center that are devoted specifically to develop new knowledge in some specific field or specific topic, and also the territory. I mean, I believe very strongly in the concept of civic university. I think that the university isolated only in the higher education of the young people, of the student, is not a very good thing nowadays, but we need to transform all of these new ideas to be very in contact with the citizens. That means with the local authorities, with the mayor of the different cities, with the region in general. And this is the concept that is also very, very used word nowadays, of the local university, that we need to focus our efforts to try to be global, but also to be local and try to interact with all the actors in the player. So the role of the challenges for the university nowadays in this new society is quite complex, and we need to be supported and to have very clear aims and mission of our mission and vision, but also to try to make this contact possible with the support of the different authorities or the different players, because it's not, and I said, not exactly very easy. I think that the university can contribute with two very important things, or three many important things. One of them is that it's the only institution, as far as I know, that is multidisciplinary. I mean, if you go to the places where the activities are developed or the knowledge are created, in general, are quite specific. You can find many very, very good research focusing cancer or in optical development or in material science or whatsoever, or in humanities, but it's very difficult to find a place where many different specialities live together and have the possibility to interact and to create new ideas, innovative ideas, with the combination of the different points of view, of the different background of the people working in the institution. I think this is critical, because the innovation, in my point of view, is not only technological innovation. We don't need only to innovate in technology. We need to innovate in many different fields. Of course, we need the societal innovation. We need the innovation to apply for the public administration. We need innovation in all the fields. For example, I have heard very frequently that the profession of the doctor will be finished in the future, because the technology will probably substitute the medical doctor, because nowadays the images are very good. There is the possibility to have even a personal monitor of all your parameters, biochemical and all kinds of things, and also we can have the genetic care of ourselves. So the information will be so high that we don't need the mind to make the diagnosis and the treatment. But this, as you know, probably is a mistake, because we need also, as Juan Pedro said, the intellectual contribution to try to analyze all of this, not only on the technological point of view, but only in the emotional point of view, I would say. But also, it's quite important to try to solve the problem, to develop new knowledge, to know the real problem, how to work. So one point that I believe the academic and specifically the university can contribute is the multidisciplinarity of the people that works in the university. The second is the only place that have the fresh ideas of the young people. The students comes to the university. I have discussed many times with my colleagues, and all of them, we are a little bit conditioned by our career, by our environment, by our research line, by many different things, our experience in general. But the young people are absolutely fresh and have the possibility to put in the table new ideas, completely different of the experience. So in general, very innovative. Probably most of them will be only ideas, very difficult to develop. But some of them are real disruptive. And the possibility to have in the university the young people and this new, fresh way to think about the different problem is quite important. And the third thing, I think that the university is quite important. That is the institution that can be in the center of this ecosystem I would suggest previously. It's difficult to find a place where we can incorporate the people from the private sector, we can incorporate the people from the technological center, we can incorporate the people from the research center, and we can incorporate the people from the local and public authorities at the local and global terms, and the nation or region. No? So it's a place where we have the possibility to develop new ideas, new procedure, a new education in general with all of these ideas together. To do that, but to do that, we need to introduce a completely transformative view of the university, to try to combine all our potential in real facts, not only in maintain the tradition of the academy in the formation of the higher education of our students, but introduce all of these new ideas and try to make a real contribution to the development of this new knowledge-based society. So I think I am quite optimistic because I have perceived, I have followed the evolution of the university community during the last 12 or 15 years. Has been a lot. Has been a very important changes in the mentality of the people. At the end is the important. The institution are not the offices, are not the building, are not the infrastructure. The institution are the people. If the people are in the way to change, it's very easy to change. If the people are not in the way to change, it's quite more difficult. But I am optimistic. I think that we have in front of the very good opportunity to contribute to the development of this new society based in the knowledge, incorporating the technology, but without to be fair of the introduction of the technology. But this is a complement of the new human, I would say, citing a very good friend and colleague, Carlos López-Otín, that is the new human emotional. And I think that emotional humanity in the future can live with the increased incorporation of technology in the wide sense that I have discussed here, not only in new technology with new machines, but in the new concept of innovation in all the fields and try to combine the multidisciplinarity on the increase of the well-being of the society. Thank you very much. Professor Varian.
So what?
You can make any suggestion, observation, or comments about the intervention of Teresa, Juan Pedro.
Okay.
New ideas, whatever you like.
Yeah. Okay. I very much agree with the views you expressed about the forging a healthy relationship with the private sector and the public sector. It's extremely important, I think, for moving society forward in the ways you described. And when I think of my experience at Google, it's important to remember Google was actually the outgrowth of a scientific research program. The National Science Foundation had a digital library program where they had such a great success with developing the internet, the means of transporting the information around the world. They wanted to make sure that there was a way to organize the information and to locate the information, to manipulate the information in a way that made it useful to people's lives. So there were 5 programs: Carnegie Mellon, University of Michigan, Berkeley, Stanford, and UC Santa Barbara, where the National Science Foundation provided funding for research in organizing information, essentially. And there were 3 search engines that came out of that. There was Lycos from Carnegie Mellon, there was Inktomi from Berkeley, and then there was Google from Stanford. So those were really important, I think, in terms of creating the infrastructure we have today with tools that can explore the World Wide Web, can exchange information, can locate new relevant topics. Without those scientific programs, without the funding from the government, this work may not have ever happened and certainly would have been significantly retarded. So it's absolutely critical to be able to fund this kind of basic research in important scientific problems. And by the way, the same is true of the autonomous vehicles, because it was the National Science Foundation and ARPA that funded the development of autonomous cars. They did that, I think, at 12 universities. Larry and Sergey went to visit the Stanford project, saw the progress that had been made, and said, I wonder what would happen if we could connect Street View with the autonomous vehicles. So it was taking that extra ingredient from the private sector and incorporating that into this public sector research initiative that made a gigantic difference in performance. So these are just two examples from my own life, from my own experience. I'm sure you all have similar examples from your experience. Having a healthy relationship between the private sector and public sector on both scientific work and the impact of that scientific work in society is one of the most important subjects we can engage in today. And it's fantastic that you were able to provide funding for this chair in innovation, because what could be more important than innovation? It's incredibly central to everything we do. Thank you.
I think we have some time open for questions. If you would like to make some of them. Please, go ahead.
I'm not sure I will be heard. Hello? Thank you very much for those very interesting thoughts. I was very interested in what you were saying, Professor Varian, in relation to technology creating jobs rather than destroying them, particularly in the context of the US. This is easy to see because there is no unemployment, right? And you mentioned that. But in Spain, I think the perceptions around technology and innovation can be further more negative, particularly amongst young people, because of our high levels of unemployment. So I would like to hear your thoughts on how you think these issues work in Spain with our high levels of unemployment amongst the young, particularly, and our problem with the skills gap. That is part of it. Thank you.
Well, I am not, certainly not an expert on the Spanish economy, so I can only answer in general terms. When you look at the charts that I showed about robotics and demography, it was very clear that the countries with the biggest demographic problems, Japan, for example, Korea, China, and so on, have invested very heavily in robots. But when you look in the Western world, Spain has a very difficult demographic problem. There's no question about it, I think. And so we have to plan for the future based on that reality. And to me, at least, or the likely solution is to try to work on this skills gap. And you can work on the skills gap from two different dimensions, namely using artificial intelligence and cognitive assistance to substitute for skills that people might otherwise need to acquire, or you can use it to bring the worker's skill set up to the level that's demanded by the jobs. And of course, in reality, it's not either or, it's both, that you're going to be working on the cognitive assistance by the computerization along with the education and training. And my own observation, which is, again, you have to think of as an amateur effort, is we could do a much better job in terms of motivating people to acquire these skills. Because I do think that more and more the instructional material is becoming available for access, it's helping people to find that material, to recognize what's the most important, and to motivate them to actually invest in acquiring those skills. So that seems to me to be the piece of the puzzle that's most critical, is getting the motivation right, getting the skill set right, and making it easy for people to acquire those skills as needed, okay? As needed in the real world. Doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have the formal education structure. You've got to just have to make these resources available and make sure that people understand how valuable they would be in terms of acquiring jobs and meaningful work in their lives.
Thank you very.
Sí, sí.
Yep.
Thank you very much, Professor. I would like to know how much are you concerned about inequality? Because if you think about your own country, if you see the effects of inequality, San Francisco they're not the same as the effects in Detroit, and it seems that a lot of people are being left behind, and somehow we should compensate. So particularly, I'd like to know your thoughts on universal basic income policies. Thanks so much.
Okay, the question was about the role of inequality, and of course there is a tension here in the sense that people, for example, said, well, Google is exacerbating inequality, but of course Google is paying in every category of employment more than the average wage, and if you're paying more than the average, then by definition you're increasing inequality. So it's not so much inequality that we want this, that we should focus on, I think, but we should focus on the inequality at the lowest levels. That is, it doesn't bother me that some people are getting rich, but it does bother me that some people are remaining poor. So you can reduce inequality by compressing both levels, but this level is, I think, the most important. That is the lower end of the income distribution. And I think there is a bit of a mystery here of why this has occurred. I mean, people note the activity, but they don't know why it's happening. And in the U.S., for example, migration patterns have changed dramatically. It used to be quite common for people to move to where the jobs were available, and that's become less common. Some of it has to do with the real estate market, some of it has to do with the education requirements, some of it has to do with aging that I mentioned earlier. People have become less dynamic, I think less entrepreneurial to some degree, at least across the entire country, even though there are these pockets of intense entrepreneurial activity. So to me, I have to say, I don't see inequality as the critical element. I see that as an effect, not really a cause. That is, it's an effect of the fact that this new technology, new possibilities become available, and the first people that are able to exploit these new technologies have become wealthy. That was true in 1900, that's true in 2000. And I think that you will be seeing more diffusion of the technology across the economy, and you'll see more shared prosperity from doing this. On the universal basic income, it's not a bad idea in my view, but I think from viewpoint of political feasibility, I think you're going to end up focusing more on people who have needs that can best be met by providing this kind of funding, but the funding will be not just a uniform $10,000 grant, but educational and training programs, healthcare, and other programs that really help people acquire the necessary education, training, and job experience that they need in order to increase their income and their welfare. So the universal basic income, we may get there someday, but I think that day is likely several decades away, in my opinion.
Please go ahead.
Good morning. I wish to know your opinion about the relationship between the human race and the technology. Is aleatory movement, or it is design?
Sorry, I didn't catch the last word. It is.
Design or defined previously is clarified.
I'm still didn't quite get the question. Did you?
No.
No.
Could you specify the question, please?
Yeah, I'm.
I want to know if the movement, the relationship between the human race and the technology, in all the last century, well, years, is a random movement, is aleatory movement, or it is a design movement? Design this situation is designed by industry, or I don't know. In order to
If it's random.
Yeah. Is it okay? Now, it's a
pre-designed.
it's a good question. I understand I understand now the issue. I've had a lot of discussions with Bob Gordon, who has written this very interesting book about technological progress, and he's quite pessimistic about progress for the future, because he points back to the innovations that we've seen in the last century and says the innovations we'll see in the next century are likely to be much smaller. And I think he's right in that. If you, and I refer to an expert in this area, my grandfather, who was a farmer in Ohio, and he said he was born in 1900 when people still got around by horse and buggy, but he lived to watch men walk on the moon. And that is really incredible, that in 70 years from the horse and buggy to walking on the moon is just phenomenal. So I like to say the 20th century is a hard act to follow, because we saw tremendous technological innovation that had dramatic impact on people's lives in almost every dimension. So will we do the same, or will we have the same progress in the next century? I don't know. The 20th century has to stand out as a special time in history. We had the Renaissance, that was a special time. We had the technological Industrial Revolution, that was a very special time, and I think the 20th century was a special time as well. So Bob may be right that we won't see the same degree of innovation, but I think we'll still see significant innovation, no problem with that, but maybe not reaching the norms that we've seen in these other cases.
Two last questions, please. One here and another.
Thank you very much for your talk. I would like to know your opinion about how should we improve or update our economist education or training in order to take into account all these phenomena you have referred in your talk.
So the question was, how should we update our economics education? And I do think economics is tremendously valuable in the private sector, for example. As you probably know, Google, Amazon, Microsoft have been hiring economists very rapidly, and they're, I think, contributing significantly to the performance in the private sector. I have to tell you a story. About 5 years ago, I got a phone call, and the party on the other end says, "Hello, this is so-and-so. I work in human relations at Amazon. She said, we're thinking about hiring a chief economist. Can you tell me, what exactly do you do? Which is a true story. It's almost too good to be true. But what do economists do? Well, I think the skills that end up being the most valuable are having the statistical, analytic skills that allow you to utilize data and information to help make better business decisions. So that's the critical part, that analytic side. But there's also the general understanding of what businesses do and why it's important and how you want to ask the right question that's going to have the most impact on the performance of the company. So there's two pieces. There's asking the right questions, and then once you've asked the right questions, getting the right answers. The second part is not just economists, statisticians, all sorts of other groups can help answer the questions, but I think economists have a good handle on asking the right questions. So that would be my answer.
So last question, please.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you all for this very insightful discussion. And maybe I have a first clarification question for Professor Varian. When you mentioned the labor shortage, I would like to know if you see this as a worldwide movement, or is this focused on a specific countries such as the developed ones? And I would also like to ask if aging would be the main factor that is contributing to this labor shortage, and if you would highlight other factors as such. One of mentions here is the lack of some skills as some of the factors, or we could highlight other factors that contribute to the labor shortage. Thank you.
That is an excellent question. You notice when I talked about the role of demography, I was focused primarily on developed countries because there are countries in the world that are also getting younger. So think of Africa, think of India. There, we're still seeing strong population growth, and the countries, the regions, are getting younger, while the developed countries are definitely getting older. So what will happen, I think, is you'll have a future 20 years from now, let's say, where you've got this young, energetic, vibrant countries in Africa and in India, and you've got the much older, less energetic, perhaps less innovative countries in the developed world. So it seems that there should be great possibilities of gains from trade between these two different regions of the world. But what form that would take, I don't know. Would take a lot of remote work where people are living in one country and working in another? Would involve migration? What will be the kinds of trade that would take place between these two different sectors? By the way, I should mention, when you look at the demographic projections, you are clearly going through this slow growth in the labor force in developed world for the next 30 years. By 2050, things kind of settle down and get back in equilibrium. So you have to think about this entire activity, this entire adjustment to the changing demographics occurring not only in the developed country, but in the globe, the entire world, because there's going to be, I think, much more integration simply because the economic effects demand it. If you've got high energy, high entrepreneurship, high development in one part of the world, much lower and slower in another part, clearly there's got to be gains from coordinating these activities, from engaging in trade. That's always been a huge effect on the world economy, and I think it'll continue to be so in the future.
Thank you very much. I think it's time to close the session. I would like to mention that for me it has been a real pleasure to be here. I come from a completely different field, that is biology and biomedicine. But as you know, as important is the multidisciplinarity. In biology, there is a term that is very, very clear, that we need to analyze everything in the scope of evolution. As evolution is a matter of innovation. The evolution of the life in the earth is a matter of innovate new structure and new procedure. And so we have discussed here innovation in the field of the improved society. So as you see, there is no so big difference. The word innovation can be used in many different topics. So I would like to thank the UAM-Accenture chair for organizing this fantastic session, to Paloma Sanchez, Juan Pedro Moreno, of course, Teresa Riesgo, and of course, Hal Varian, all of you for your attendance. Thank you very much.